The block was set, a digital wall erected between me and a past best forgotten. His number, a constant reminder of pain and fear, banished from my phone's memory. Peace, I hoped, would follow. Night arrived, draping the world in its inky cloak. My phone, usually a source of comfort, sat silent on the bedside table. Then it jolted to life, the screen illuminated, revealing an unknown number. I ignored it, probably a mistake, probably nothing. It rang again and again. Each time the unknown number glared from the screen, a persistent intrusion into my fragile calm. My heart beat a little faster with each ring. I refused to answer. The calls persisted for days, always at night. Always the same unknown number, always unanswered. My sleep became a battlefield. I tossed and turned, haunted by the silent caller. Paranoia began to creep into my days, coloring everything with its grim hue. One night the phone rang. My hand trembled as I reached for it. This time a wave of anger washed over me, eclipsing the dread. I pressed the answer button. Silence. Then breathing, deep, measured, disturbing. I snapped. A scream tore from my throat, a primal sound of fury and fear. I demanded to be left alone. The breathing stopped abruptly. The line went dead. Silence descended, deeper and more profound than before. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a crack and fell to the floor. I sat up in bed, panting, my body shaking, the silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Then, from somewhere inside the house, a voice spoke, simple, plain, and utterly devoid of emotion. "I'm here." I know where he is. I have always known. He locks the doors, checks the windows, watches the cameras. He thinks they will keep me out. They do not. The alarm wails in the night, dragging him from sleep. He stumbles through the house, heart racing, scanning every corner, but there is nothing. The police arrive, search and leave. They tell him it was nothing. He believes them. He shouldn't. He moves through his days with tired eyes, his hands shaking when he reaches for his keys, his phone, his door handle. He tells himself he is safe, that I'm gone, he's wrong, his house is mine now. The walls know my breath, the floors know my steps. The darkness is kind to me, keeps me hidden where he will not look. I hear him above me pacing, restless, whispering curses into the empty air. He cannot see me, but I see him. I know his habits. The way he double-checks the locks before bed, the way he tenses when a floorboard creaks behind him, the way he sleeps with a lamp on, because the dark is not as empty as he wants it to be. The alarm screams again. This time, he does not call the police. He moves through the house, careful, silent, searching. His steps take him to the basement door. He grips the handle, pausing, breath shaking. He doesn't want to go down, but he has to. The stairs groan beneath him as he descends. The light flickers, weak and pale. The air smells wrong, stale, unwashed, rotting. His breath catches. The mattress is there, crumpled in the corner. Blankets twisted, stained, a pile of wrappers, empty cans, something once living, now shriveled with time. And the knife. He stares at it. His face drains of color, his hands tremble, his throat tightens as he fights to breathe. I can hear his pulse. Fast, too fast. He takes a step back and I step forward. I stand in the dark outside her window. The curtains are closed, but I can see the faint glow of the bedside lamp seeping through the fabric. She never used to sleep with a light on. That's new. I wonder if she thinks it will help. She thinks she's safe. She thinks she's free. She isn't. I have been patient, I have been quiet. I let her play house with her new little pet. Let her think she was moving on. But she belongs to me, she always has. Her new man parks in the same spot every night. I know the shape of his car, the dent on the side where someone scraped against him in a car park. He locks the doors, but locks mean nothing to me. The first time, I just let the air out of his tires. The second time, I used the knife. He must have been proud of the new paint job. It looked better when I was done with it. The calls were next. She doesn't answer unknown numbers anymore. She used to. Now she just listens. I know she hears me. I know she's afraid. I like that. The fear is good. It means she remembers. The house is quiet when I step inside. I know where the floorboards creak, where the doors stick if you push too hard. I have been here before. I have stood in the corners of this place and listened to her breathe. Her pet is asleep on the sofa. He is not a man. Not really. Too soft, too trusting, too easy. The rope bites into his skin as I pull it tight. He stirs just for a moment, but then he is still. He will wake up when I want him to, not before. She is in the bedroom, the same bed we used to share, the same sheets. I stand beside her, close enough to touch, close enough to remember. Her breath hitches, her body shifting. Some part of her knows. Even in sleep she knows. She wakes. She sees me. She doesn't scream. Not yet. I smile. The door clicks shut behind her. She doesn't know I was here. She drops her keys on the table, kicks off her shoes, rubs her face with tired hands. She thinks she's alone. She thinks her boy is safe. She is wrong. I was here before she got home, before the babysitter locked the door, turned off the lights, curled up on the sofa to wait. I was here before she even thought of checking on him. He sleeps so soundly now, his small body curled under the blanket, arms tucked in, lips parted in soft breaths. He doesn't know I was here either, but I was. I stood over him in the dark, listening to the rise and fall of his chest. I brushed the hair from his face the way I used to when he was smaller, when I was still allowed to be his father. I pulled the blanket up to his chin. I tucked him in. The babysitter hadn't done it yet. She said so when the woman came home and asked. The babysitter had been in the other room, waiting, phone in hand, half asleep. So, who tucked him in? The question sits between them, heavy in the quiet house. She checks the locks again. She moves through the house, opening doors, flicking on lights. Her hands shake when she reaches for the remote, rewinds the security footage, presses play. The screen flickers. The backyard is still, the fence untouched, the doors never open. Then, in the corner of the frame, a window moves. A dark shape pulls itself inside, slow and careful, not disturbing a thing. It moves through the shadows, gliding through the empty house, past the babysitter, down the hall, into his room. It stands over the bed, watching. The shape bends, reaches down. A hand brushes against the boy's cheek, smooths the blanket, fingers curling around the fabric, tucking him in. Then it straightens, turns, and looks directly into the camera. She knows the face, she knows the eyes, she knows me. The recording stutters, jumps, distorts, and then I am gone. The flat door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. I shrugged off my coat, the day's chill still clinging to the fabric. Usually the aroma of whatever Sarah was cooking would greet me, but tonight only silence met me. I walked into the living room. Sarah sat on the sofa, rigidly, her eyes fixed on the blank television screen. I could sense the tension rolling from her. I kneeled, trying to meet her gaze. She flinched, drawing back as if burned. I touched her arm gently and she jumped, a small cry escaping her. Her skin was clammy beneath my fingers. I asked her with my eyes what was troubling her, but she just shook her head, her gaze darting around the room. She gripped my hand, her nails digging into my skin. I pulled her into a hug, hoping to offer some comfort, but her body remained rigid, unyielding. After a drawn-out moment, she pulled away. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She walked to the window, peering out into the street below. I followed her, concerned. She spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Someone had been following her. Someone, she said, who looked exactly like her. She described the outfit, the shoes, even the way her imitation walked. How could this be? I tried to reassure her that it must have been a trick of the light or a case of mistaken identity, but her fear was real. A cold seeped into my bones as I watched her. I decided to check the building's security footage. Maybe it would put her mind at rest, show her that it was nothing to worry about. I logged into the system, my hands trembling slightly. I scrolled back through the hours to the time she specified, and then the video. My breath caught in my throat. There, in the hallway outside our flat, was my ex. She was wearing a wig styled to match Sarah's hair. She wore the exact same clothes Sarah had been wearing that day. She studied herself in the reflection of the lift doors, adjusting the wig, smoothing down the fabric of the dress. Then she began to mimic actions. A gesture Sarah often made when thinking, the way Sarah tilted her head when confused, the slight bounce in her step. On the screen, my ex performed, rehearsing a role. She repeated the same actions again and again until they seemed almost perfect. A grotesque puppet show played out in the grainy security footage. I continued to watch, unable to tear my gaze away. My ex moved up and down our hallway, walking past our door, then turned and repeated the action over and over. She was trying to perfect her imitation. She'd stop outside our door, listening before starting the routine again. I rewound the footage, focusing on her face. Her expression was blank, devoid of emotion. It was a mask of chilling determination. I shut down the security system, the glow dying on the screen. I turned back to Sarah, but she hadn't moved from the window. She stood perfectly still, her back to me like a figurine. I walked towards her, a sense of dread building in my stomach. As I grew even, I noticed something on the glass of the window. A smudge, a print, a face pressed against it from the other side. I froze. I dared not breathe. Slowly, very slowly, Sarah turned around. It wasn't Sarah that turned to face me. The metal key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, finally. New locks, new beginning. I pushed the thought of him, his anger, his fists far, far away. This house, this space was mine, safe. The days turned into weeks. I started to breathe easier, to sleep sounder. The nightmares, once a nightly visitor, faded slightly, replaced by a fragile peace. I almost started to believe I was free. Then came the night. I woke abruptly, not from a dream, not from a noise, but from a feeling. A bone-deep primal terror that clawed its way up my spine and stole the breath from my lungs. I lay frozen, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My eyes strained in the darkness. The room was still, silent. Just the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. Nothing. I blinked, my gaze sweeping round the room again. And then I eyed his form. He was at the foot of my bed, just standing there, a dark silhouette against the dim light. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew it was him, knew it in the same way a prey animal knows the presence of a predator. A breath escaped my lips, a silent whimper lost in the stillness. I tried to scream, but my throat was constricted, paralyzed by fear. He speak. The words crawled into my mind, a vile invasion of my thoughts. They resonated deep inside my skull. He communicated that I could ever escape him. Then he began to back away, sliding backwards further into the darkness beyond the bedroom door. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics. His form melted into the blackness of the hallway and he vanished like smoke. I remained there, rigid. The silence of the house pressed down on me, heavier than any physical thing. I wanted to move, to run, to scream, but I was frozen, trapped in a prison of my own terror. Hours passed. The first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, painting faint grey streaks across the room. Slowly, tentatively, I moved. I reached for the lamp on my bedside table, my hand shaking so violently I almost knocked it over. The sudden burst of light banished some of the darkness, but not the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The room was empty. The door was still shut. Everything was as it should be, except it wasn't. I got out of bed, my legs unsteady beneath me. I checked the door, locked, the windows, locked. Every entry point to the house secured, impeccable. I stumbled through the house, checking every room, every cupboard, every hiding place. Nothing. He was gone. But his voice, his presence remained burned into my mind. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions of living, but I was merely a shell, hollowed out by fear. Every sound, every shadow sent a jolt of terror through me. I jumped easily, startled by the most mundane things. As dusk descended, the familiar sense of dread returned, amplified by the memory of the night before. I closed all the blinds, locked all the doors, and barricaded myself in my bedroom. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with dark figures and whispered threats. I tossed and turned, haunted by his presence, his voice. I don't know when he started to come back from here. Each night his visits would become more and more frequent. The flat was quiet as I got back from work. Quiet was good. Quiet was what I needed after the last few years after her. Dating again had been odd, like learning to ride a bike after a very, very nasty fall. But Sarah was nice, normal. After a few months, she suggested moving in. I hesitated, then said yes, maybe too quickly. Things were good, really good. We laughed, we cooked together, we watched rubbish TV. It was easy, peaceful. But sometimes when I woke up in the middle of the night, I had the sensation of something just beyond the edge of the bed, just out of sight. I'd tell myself it was just a bad dream, something left over from before. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah was out shopping. I was catching up on some reading. A knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I glanced through the peephole. No one there. Must have been kids playing pranks. I turned back to my book. The knocking came again, firmer. Annoyed, I headed to the door, ready to give whoever it was a piece of my mind. But then I remember Sarah had her keys. I got to the door. Just as Sarah came back, she got to the door. "I'll get it," she said, smiling. She reached for the handle. Standing in the doorway was her, my ex. In her hand she held a knife. A smile stretched across her face. My breath hitched. I wanted to shout, to scream, to do something, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot. She hadn't changed. The same dark eyes, the same too sweet smile that never quite reached them. The smile I used to think was cute. Sarah didn't know. Sarah couldn't know. Her eyes locked onto mine, a flicker of something mad dancing within them. The smile widened, predatory. She lifted the knife slightly, the metal glinting in the afternoon light, a silent promise. Sarah looked from her to me, confusion clouding her features. She opened her mouth, probably to ask a question, but before she could say anything, my ex stepped forward, pushing past. I lurched forward, trying to grab her, to stop whatever was about to happen, but she was too quick, too strong. She moved with a speed I remembered all too well, a speed fueled by something dark and twisted. I watched, helpless, as she advanced. The knife never wavered. Her focus never shifted. Her smile never faded. The removal van pulled away, leaving me alone with the boxes in my new house. It was small, but it was mine. More importantly, he didn't know where it was. I'd made sure of that. This was my fresh start, my escape. A couple of days later, a package arrived. A mirror, round and ornate, with a dark wood frame. It looked familiar, too familiar. My stomach did a flip. We used to have one just like it in the bedroom before. I pushed the thought away. It must be from Sarah, trying to cheer me up. She knew I was missing some of my things. I carried it upstairs and hung it on the wall opposite the bed. It looked good, I had to admit. Even if it did bring back memories I'd rather forget. I told myself it was just a mirror, a gift. Nothing more. That night I was drifting off to sleep when I noticed a faint noise. A buzzing, at volume like a trapped fly. I sat up, listening hard. It seemed to be coming from the mirror. I got out of bed and approached it cautiously. The buzzing was definitely louder now. I put my ear to the glass, trying to pinpoint the source. It sounded like it was coming from inside the frame. With trembling fingers, I ran my hands along the edge of the mirror, searching for a seam, a join, anything that would explain the noise. Then I found it. A small, almost invisible indentation on the side of the frame. I pressed on it and a section of the wood popped open, revealing a small compartment. I peered inside. My breath caught in my throat. Nestled within the compartment was a tiny camera. A miniature lens stared back at me, cold and black. A wire snaked out of the camera and disappeared into the back of the mirror. My heart hammered in my chest. The buzzing was the sound of the camera recording, but who had put it there, and how? The answer hit me with the force of a physical blow. It couldn't be. It just couldn't, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. Who was responsible? He'd found me. Panic clawed at my throat. I ripped the mirror off the wall, smashing it against the floor. The glass shattered, the frame splintered, but the camera remained intact, its unblinking eyes still fixed on me. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and smashed the camera to pieces, but fear, a deep, primitive thing, had taken root inside me. I bolted the door, checked, closed the windows. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sent shivers down my spine. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every sound. Sleep was impossible. Thoughts raced through my mind. How had he known where to send the mirror? Was he nearby? Was he watching me even now? As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of grey and pink, I crept downstairs. I needed to call the police, to tell them everything, to feel secure. I picked up the phone, but my hand froze. The line was dead. I tried my mobile, no signal. I ran outside, desperation rising. Still no signal. I was cut off. I gazed around, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. The street seemed normal, quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. Back inside, I started searching the house, room by room, cupboard by cupboard. I was looking for something, anything that would explain what was happening, something that would prove I wasn't going crazy. In the attic, tucked away in a dusty corner, I found a box, an old wooden box bound with twine. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, was a photograph of me asleep in my bed. It must have been taken last night. The angle was from the mirror on the wall. Beneath the photograph was another item, a small black device with a single blinking light. I didn't know what it was, but I knew with a growing sense of dread that it was the source of the buzzing noise. And then I noticed something else, a faint scratching sound coming from the walls. A scratching that grew in intensity with each passing moment. I stood frozen, my every muscle tense. The scratching was everywhere now, all around me. In the walls, in the ceiling, in the floor, and then the lights went out. The photos appeared normal at a glance, pictures from a day out, a fresh start. I scrolled through them trying to find one to post. My life was back on track, or so I wanted everyone to think. After the upset, the arguing, the constant feeling of being trapped, I was free. I needed to show it. Then I noticed it, a smudge in the background of a photo taken in the park. I zoomed in. It was a person, or at least the shape of one. Blurred, indistinct, but undeniably there. I frowned. I was sure the park had been empty that day. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, or maybe someone walking past quickly while the picture was taken. The next day I was at the grocery shop. I took a picture of the fruit display, something bright and colourful to show my renewed appreciation for life's simple pleasures. Later, checking the photo, there it was again, that figure, further away but still visible between the rows of oranges and apples. The feeling of something not being right crawled up my spine. It couldn't be a coincidence. I started checking older photos, pictures from my work, from that pub lunch last week, from when I helped my mate move house. In each one, if I looked hard enough, was that shape. Always in the background, always just out of focus, like a glitch in the matrix, a silent observer. Sleep became difficult. My mind raced, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Was someone following me? Was I going mad? I jumped at small noises, every creak of the house sending a shiver down my spine. A weekend away with friends was meant to be a break, a chance to relax and forget. We went to the coast, rented a small cottage, and spent the days walking along the cliffs, the wind whipping our faces. I even managed to laugh properly for the first time in months. I felt almost normal. Back home, I uploaded the photos from the trip to my computer, pictures of us on the beach, huddled around a bonfire, playing cards in the cottage, carefree, happy memories. And then its presence. In the picture from the beach, it was there, a speck on the horizon, in the bonfire shot, standing amongst the dunes partially hidden by the darkness. But in the picture taken inside the cottage, while we were playing cards, it was clear. Standing in the doorway behind us, barely visible, was her, my ex. I stared at the photo, my breath catching in my throat. It was her shape, her hair, the way she stood. I knew it. How? Why? We had finished. I'd made sure of it. It was over. I'd blocked her number, deleted her from social media, cut all ties. How could she be here? I scrolled back through all the photos, magnifying each one. In every picture, the figure was becoming clearer. The shape was solidifying, the features becoming more defined. It was always her. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My heart pounded in my chest, fear constricting my throat. I had to get out. I had to escape. I ran, grabbing my keys and phone. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, not for another second. I reversed out of the drive, tires squealing, and sped away. I drove all night, not stopping until sunrise. I was miles away from home in a small village I had never visited before. I booked into a bed and breakfast, desperate for sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I still just presence. I decided to check my socials. I tentatively opened my phone and opened the social media app. There was a new picture uploaded. Friends had uploaded photos from the weekend. The photo was from the bonfire on the beach with everyone gathered around. In the back, just behind me, she was standing there staring right at the camera. In the picture I'd taken, the figure was blurred, and in the distance, in this photo, she was front and center, looking right at me. The taxi pulled away, its taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood on the doorstep, keys clutched tightly in my hand. It was the initial time I'd been out since everything changed. Guilt gnawed at me, but Mrs. Davies, the babysitter, had seemed nice enough when she arrived. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. Usually, even asleep, my little Lily made some sort of noise, a tiny snore or a mumbled word. But tonight, there was nothing. I moved through the hallway, each step amplifying the silence. In the living room, the television screen flickered with static. Mrs. Davies sat rigid on the edge of the sofa, her face pale and drawn. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. As I entered, she flinched, her body jolting slightly. I raised an eyebrow, a silent question. Mrs. Davies swallowed, her throat bobbing. She didn't meet my gaze. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, she explained, her voice barely a whisper. A man had come to the door. He said he was Lily's dad. My stomach dropped. My breath hitched. No, he wasn't meant to know. Mrs. Davies continued, her voice gaining a little strength as she spoke. He was calm. Too calm. He smiled. He was wearing a neat dark coat. He spoke softly, politely. He knew Lily's name, her favourite tea-time meal, the stories she wanted before bed. He even knew the little nickname only I used, the one that made my heart ache. A cold prickle ran down my spine. How could he know? Mrs. Davies said he asked to see Lily to just peek in on her. She had refused, of course. She didn't know him and was not allowed to let anyone in. He had become insistent then, his voice rising ever so slightly, but the smile never faltering. He kept repeating that he just wanted to see his little girl, that it had been so long. Mrs. Davies said she had stood her ground. She told him I would be home soon and he could speak to me then. She had shut the door and bolted it, but he remained on the porch for a time before he left. She had watched him from the window as he walked away. My mind raced. It wasn't possible. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had agreed, signed the papers. He was meant to stay away. I rushed upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed open Lily's bedroom door. She was asleep in her cot, her small chest rising and falling gently. Her favourite teddy bear was clutched in her tiny arms. I stood there for a moment, watching her, willing myself to breathe. Relief washed over me, so potent that my knees nearly buckled. She was okay. He hadn't gotten to her. I tiptoed out of the room and went back downstairs. Mrs. Davies was still sitting on the sofa just as I had left her. I paid her, adding extra for the obvious distress she had experienced. She took the money without a word, her eyes still wide and darting. She practically ran out of the house, not even offering a goodbye. I locked the door behind her, double-bolting it and engaging the chain. I checked all the windows on the ground floor, making sure they were securely fastened. Then I went upstairs again to check on Lily. She was still asleep, still clutching her bear. But as I stood over her, I noticed something small, something out of place. Resting on her bedside table, next to her nightlight, was a small object, a single white rose. Not a bud or a stem, just the head of a rose, freshly cut. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't seen it before. My blood turned to ice. I picked up the rose head, its petals soft and cool against my skin. A faint, sweet scent filled the air. Lily stirred in her sleep, mumbling something I couldn't understand. I placed the rose head back on the bedside table. I quickly turned and exited the room. Downstairs, every creak of the floorboard screamed at me. Each shadow seemed to lengthen and twist, forming grotesque shapes in the dim light. I checked the doors again, the windows, the locks. Everything was secure, but that rose... I went back upstairs, drawn by an invisible force. I had to see it again. I crept into Lily's room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The rose head was still there, on the bedside table. But something was different. A single petal had fallen. It lay on the table, a stark white against the dark wood. I stared at it, mesmerized. Then a floorboard creaked downstairs. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The sound came again and again, each one seemingly closer than the last. Someone was in the house. I backed out of Lily's room, my breath caught in my throat. I had to protect her. I had to get us out of here. I turned and ran, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I reached my bedroom and grabbed my phone from the bedside table. My fingers fumbled with the screen, struggling to unlock it. Another creak, closer this time. I finally unlocked the phone and frantically dialed the police, but as I brought the phone to my ear, that something wasn't right. I slowly moved my head around. On the wall opposite me, painted in what looked like crimson ink, was a message. "She looks just like you." My breath hitched, and my gaze darted back to Lily's room. A soft creak echoed from within. I moved towards the door, every step an eternity. I pushed it open with trepidation. There, standing over Lily's cot, was a figure, tall, dark, and indistinct in the poor light that entered the room. A figure that seemed to emanate a bone-chilling cold. The figure didn't move as I approached, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge my presence. It just stood there, still. I tried to make out the figure's face. Then the figure slowly reached into the cot. For my daughter. I yelled and rushed forward, but as I approached, the image shimmered, became unfocused. Then it was gone. I stared at the empty space where the figure had stood. Lily remained asleep and unharmed in her bed. I wanted to believe it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, a product of my overwrought imagination, but the lingering feeling of cold and the faint scent of roses that filled the room told a different story. I scooped Lily into my arms and fled the house. I rushed to the car and drove away. I pulled into a lay-by where I composed myself, trying to form a plan on what to do next. My phone started to ring. It was an unknown number. I slowly reached for the phone and answered it. Nothing. I went to end the call when I finally could hear sounds, quiet sounds like I was in a room. Then I heard what sounded like children laughing. The phone went dead. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. It was then that, as I gathered myself from high in the tree above the car, I could see a hand slowly reach down and drop a single white rose onto the bonnet. The house felt empty, even more empty than usual. Jasper, my ginger cat, was gone. He always greeted me at the door, weaving between my legs as I came in. Not today. I searched the house, called his name, nothing. He must have slipped out, I reasoned. He'd be back for supper. But supper came and went, and Jasper didn't. The next day, Barnaby vanished. Barnaby was my Labrador, a big, goofy softy who loved nothing more than a tummy tickle. He was always under my feet, now nothing. The back gate was securely locked, the fence intact. It was as if he'd evaporated. I began to worry, real worry. 2 pets gone in as many days. It was a terrible coincidence. I put up posters, walked the streets, asked the neighbours. No one had seen them. The police was sympathetic, but said there was little they could do. Animals go missing all the time. It was just one of those things. Then Pip, my budgie, disappeared from his cage. The cage door was firmly shut, no feathers on the floor, no sign of a struggle. He was just gone. Now I was beyond worry. I was becoming scared. 3 pets, all vanished without a trace. It made no sense. I started locking all the doors and windows at night, even though it was summer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then I received a text message. It was from Mark, my ex-husband. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the divorce went through. The message contained only 6 words. "Do you miss them yet?" A wave of icy dread washed over me. Mark always hated my animals. He said they were messy, noisy, and demanded too much attention. He'd never physically hurt them, but he'd often make nasty comments, saying things like, "I'm surprised that Mangy Mutt hasn't run away yet." I called the police, showed them the message. They took it seriously this time. They brought Mark in for questioning, but he denied everything. He claimed he sent the message as a joke, a twisted way of getting back at me for the divorce. He said he didn't know anything about my missing pets. The police couldn't prove otherwise and had to release him. I knew he was lying, but I couldn't prove it either. I spent the next few days in a state of high anxiety, jumping at every sound. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept replaying the message in my head over and over. Do you miss them yet? One afternoon, driven by a desperate need to do something, anything, I went into the garden. The sun was shining, but I felt cold, almost frozen. I started digging. I don't know why, I just felt compelled to. I picked a spot near the back fence where Barnaby loved to bury his bones. I dug and dug, the soil getting darker and damper as I went deeper. After a while, the spade struck something hard. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my hands, pulling away the earth. Then I saw it. A collar, Jasper's collar. I recognized the little silver bell attached to it. I kept digging, my hands shaking. Next to Jasper's collar was Barnaby's, the leather worn and cracked, and then Pip's tiny collar, barely bigger than a button. They were arranged in a neat row, side by side, as if they were waiting for something. Or someone.